So we begin with Act 1, Scene 2 of Tempest. Now, previously, what we saw in Act 1, Scene 1 is just 65 lines, and we see the ship, fighting against its fate, its destiny. And we can see that there was this chaos in the nature that has upset the social hierarchy, which is so obvious in so many dialogues of the other characters. The scene also, raises questions of power and control, which happens to be one of the major themes that we see in the entire play. So it is very important that we don't miss on what has been reflected in Act 1, Scene 1. We see it is a wonderful study of human behavior. You see the fear of death. We see different characters. In fact, when they are put into a very absurd kind of a situation that they are not prepared with, we see their characters, losing that momentum, that control. And just as the tension rises, we see in the first 65 lines there's so much of tension. It begins with that tense atmosphere wherein nature is against human beings. And what we see is this text begins in the middle of crisis. We see the concept of authority being challenged. There are so many other characters that we see here on board. The passengers that we here have is the king of Naples, his courtiers, his brother, his son. And what happens at the end is the ship is somehow not in control, and everybody seems to drown in the Act 1, Scene 1. So we move on to the setting of this scene. Unlike the first scene, which is very much, we see the setting happens in the sea. We see the violent storm. The sailors are really wrestling and trying hard to control their ship. Now, obvious to that, we have scene 2, which is happening in a very remote island. So scene 1, we have on the sea, people on the board. We have all the noblemen on the ship. Contrary to that, we have just a few characters here on this island, and it begins with two major characters of our text: Prospero, who happens to be the protagonist of our story, and his daughter Miranda. Now, this scene can be divided into four parts. It is just for our convenience. We have first part, wherein we have the discussion of the father and the daughter Prospero and Miranda. The second part, we have a protagonist Prospero talking to his, in fact, airy spirit, that is Ariel. The third part of this scene can be divided with the father and the daughter, and we have one more additional character being introduced, who happens to be Caliban, the slave here, very contrary in character to the other slave that we have, that is Ariel. And the last part of this scene can be put as Miranda, Prospero, and Ferdinand's discussion. So this particular scene, scene 2, happens to be a little long, and the purpose of this first part of the scene, wherein we have a long discussion of father and daughter, a very important part of the text is revealed here, which happens to be the past of these two characters as to how did they come to be on this island. And we find out as to how he was betrayed by his own brother. So when we realize this, right, the authenticity of the first scene that we see in form of a tempest, is something that is questionable, right? And let's look at the very first dialogue that the scene begins with. And the lines are: "If thou, by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar, allay them. Now this line happens to be so strange. Now if you by your art, my father, if you have put this wild waters in roar, uh, what it seems to be here is Prospero has the ability to, raise storm. Now, this was something very common when it comes to magicians or witches. And when she says that if thou by your art is in reference to magic. So, obviously, it means that she is aware of her father's magic power. You're right. So if you have done this, please, quieten them. Please command these wild waters to settle down. So these lines put her in contradictory to what Prospero is. She was just a mere spectator the way we are when we see the first scene, and she happens to be so moved. She happens to be somebody who is full of these tender sympathies, and this this father figure who happens to be a magician here is a complete surprise for us, because we are absolutely not aware of the fact that it is he who has raised this storm in the previous scene. And look at the further lines when she says that had I been any god of power, I would have sunk the sea within the earth, or before it should the good ship so have swallowed, and the frothing souls within her. So these particular lines, if you look at these lines, it is more a kind of a challenge to her dad, a father figure who is absolutely lack of pity, and she's somebody who's full of kindness. And it's again surprising as to why did he do that. To which Prospero's statement comes another package of surprise, wherein he says that don't worry, right? I have such a provision in my art. People look at the reference of the word art used here. He considers the skills that he has, this magic skills, as art. So he says that, I have such a provision, and all of them have been safely ordered, somewhere, and there's not a soul who has been, harmed. The answer to her, anxious question to find out as to what has happened to these, passengers who were there on the ship. Look at his answer, wherein he says that no harm, dear, don't worry, right? I have done nothing but in care of thee, my dear one, thee, my daughter, who art ignorant of what thou art. Now, this is something important. Now, this is quite amazing as to um, how does he say that all that I have done is, uh, because of you. Look at the repetition that he uses here, the almost, thrice. That shows Prospero's concern for his daughter, and that could have been, the motivation for the action that he has just done in form of creating tempest, a storm. So our impression about Prospero as to how cruel he would be, as to drowning all of these characters, and then suddenly we realize that he's a magician and he created this storm. While we see the father daughter discussion, we start getting curious about this character Prospero, and we would like to know further about this guy. And the entire idea of the tempest that we have changes completely, right? It could be that it is a metaphorical significance of storm here, and could be that it is very important to restore a kind of a natural order. So gradually we see the story picking up, and we start getting curious about as to why did it happen, and what was the reason behind that. And this I get reminded of, if you are well aware of the story of God and the Noah's ark, as to how did he raise that flood to destroy the wicked people. Similarly, we can say, we can compare Prospero raising a storm uh, to teach a kind of a lesson, and what is that is something that we need to figure out. So it is here the flashback of the story begins, when Prospero says that you are not sure as to where do you come from, you know nothing about me, all that you know that I'm just a master of this poor cell. uh, this also means as there is a lot that we need to explore about this character. And it is at this time that he asks his daughter Miranda to, in fact, help him to disrobe, right? And here he takes the charge and he starts sharing this story, wherein the perception of this evil minded Prospero that looks like currently changes completely. Miranda is expected to be very obedient, and this is again very necessary. I would say Shakespeare is very smart enough in his dramatic skills. Had she not been attentive and silent, probably the message would not have been conveyed. So, obviously, now that we come to know that there is a lot that she needs to know, and the past that was kept intentionally hidden all this while. Imagine what would have this character that is Prospero undergone, right? Imagine the kind of a volcano and the emotions that were buried inside him all these years is gradually erupting, and he wants to be heard. And this is exactly what Shakespeare wants us as audience to listen to him. And then the story begins, to which Prospero says, do you remember as to anything that you can recall, or and then it is very clear regarding certain mention of years here. It was just around 3 odd years that you were young enough to remember something. To which she says that, yeah, I do remember a few people, in fact, taking care of me, 4 to 5 women who tended me. And it was a mere surprise for Prospero as to how could she recall that. And then begins the story in flashback, saying that it has been 12 years since that your father, the Duke of Milan, and the Prince of Power, and here we come to know more about Prospero and his background as to he being the Duke of Milan. It comes as a utter surprise for Miranda, and she's really shocked as to find out as to what foul play was it, and how is it that we have come here. We should have been enjoying the luxuries of palace, or blessed wasn't we. In fact, she's curious enough to find out how come they've landed here on this island, barren island, with absolutely no facilities. To which Prospero's response is both. It was indeed a foul play, and we were in fact blessed either. So, as readers, we tend to get more serious to find out as to what would have happened to this duo, the father and daughter. Why is it that they have landed here on this barren island? And not only about Prospero, we also come to know about his brother Antonio, Miranda's uncle. And he's introduced here as a wicked brother. And why is he considered to be wicked? Again, there is a story behind his disloyalty. It seems that Prospero, when he was a duke, he was so reputed in terms of dignity, for his liberal arts, that he had no comparison at all right, and he was so engrossed into his study that he left the entire government, the administration, upon his brother Antonio, and he started, growing stranger and stranger to his own administration, and he was just, carried away into the secret studies of occult magic, right? And it was this time that his false brother, right, that is Antonio, took advantage of it. So here this is a clear indication, a message that these are the, dangers of retreat. When you retreat into your own self, neglecting other responsibilities, people might take advantage of that, and that is what happened with Prospero. So what happens is, when in the absence of Prospero, Antonio takes the charge of dukedom. Right? He is smart enough. He has mastered the art of politics now. He knows whom to promote. He knows whom to deny. He keeps a check as to who is over ambitious. And within just a matter of time, he created a new empire, a new office, a new group of people, administration, wherein he could have the complete control of the state. And Shakespeare is so smart in using imagery here, and he uses the image of ivy and the trunk here. In fact, here we can see the image as well. And Shakespeare comes up with this beautiful, imagery with the double significance. He becomes that, Antonio as a brother who starts growing ambitious and starts becoming, greedy. He now wants this absolute political control by creating new posts of his own people, and he happens to be a destructive parasite that surrounds the oak tree that is Prospero, which is otherwise, very strong tree, has been weakened here by ivy, and ivy is the reference to Antonio. So Prospero, as a good parent, had in fact unlimited trust, confidence on his brother, and no doubt you don't doubt your own brother, right? And Antonio somehow, started internalizing his exercise of power, and he started developing this evil nature. And there is a clear reference that Prospero makes, and it's very important to be noted here, that he started neglecting worldly ends. So he admits that he is responsible, right? He tried to choose bettering of his mind by getting engrossed into studies, and because of this, the charge that Antonio was given of administrating the kingdom of Prospero lead to this greed in Antonio. And look at how wonderfully, Shakespeare puts this, that Antonio's belief of being duke rested just on outward appearance. He did not like just being in charge of something. He wanted it completely, absolutely. Look at the lines 100, which says that, who having into truth by telling of it made a sinner of his memory to credit his own lie. So it's a wonderful example as to, if we keep lying something again and again, we tend to believe it to be true, and this is exactly that happened with Antonio. Right? No more he considered himself to be the one who is carrying this responsibility behalf of his brother. So here we see an absolute, contrast between the two brothers. Antonio, who wanted, absolute Milan, no half roles. On the other hand, we have Prospero, for whom his library was dukedom large enough, and because he was engrossed so much into bettering his mind, Antonio came up with the idea, uh, uh, blaming that Prospero was incapable, not competent enough to. In fact, this was the conspiracy, and this is how he could take over Milan. Now that there is this growing ambition, nothing could stop him. So he, in fact, declares him to be incompetent of taking care of his own kingdom, and it is at this time that he, in fact, joins hands with the neighboring kingdom, the king of Naples, and it is, in fact, they come up with a win-win agreement, and it is here that we see how people are opportunist. The neighboring uh, kingdom, that is Naples, and the king of Naples, that is Alonso, takes this opportunity, and they come up with a kind of an agreement, and the agreement is to pay him an annual tribute, to do him homage. They would be subject his coronet to his crown, and it is in this way that Antonio, with the help of king of Naples, takes over his own brother's kingdom and betrays his brother. So this is an elaborate, discussion of Prospero. If you look at his language, it looks sometimes in certain areas too complex. Why? Because he gets very emotional, recalling these incidents, and he somehow admits that how his own conduct contributed to his brother's treachery. And then comes that fateful midnight wherein Antonio opens the gates of Milan, and there is this treacherous army that was raised, and in that dark night, in fact, the ministers for the purpose hurried thence me and thy crying self. So it is a very sorry plight of Prospero, with baby Miranda, running away from his own kingdom. So what we see is, as readers, we are made aware of the background of this story. In fact, this was a kind of an off-stage discussion, and we come to know as to what had actually went wrong, that Prospero the Duke has landed here on this barren island. So it is probably this reason that he wants to take revenge. And having heard this long story, Miranda is she's literally emotional, tears rolling down her eyes, and she was really scared as to she was curious to find out what next. Did they really kill us? To which Prospero comes up with a very important piece of information, and that is the Duke, the senior Duke, that is Prospero, was no doubt loved by his people, and this business was bloody, in the sense Antonio joining with the neighboring king and planning to kill Prospero was no doubt a foul deed, but with colors fairer painted. Now, the illusion that Antonio and Alonso created was that now they could not be killed. Obviously, people would have doubted Antonio, because most of the time when it comes to brothers, there is always the issue of who would take the throne. So people would have not accepted Antonio that easily and would have doubted him. So he creates this illusion that the army had attacked them somewhere in the midnight, and uh, Prospero and baby Miranda were just sent away in a ship in order to, save themselves from getting killed by these soldiers. But the fact was, um, the boat that was given to them was not, in fact, fit to sail even for a few uh, leagues to sea. In fact, it was just a rotten skeleton of a ship. There was nothing left of it. Even it is believed that the rats had, abandoned it, and there they are left, you know, at the mercy of the sea and the roaring sea, and their helplessness. And with this, Miranda is worried as to I would have been such a trouble because I was just, 3 years old. To which Prospero says, "No, no, darling, you were just like an angel to me. In fact, you were the reason that I did preserve, and your smile was something that gave fortitude, that gave me strength, and it was somehow, the God's divine, plan that I could, in fact, bear all these, tragedies." And when we see Prospero indulging into, his past, he is shown so calm, composed. We see a very matured behavior, while sharing this information, which is no doubt very disturbing, the problems and his relationship with his brother. It doesn't seem to change his tone. He's not shown enraged. He responds very calmly to the questions, curiosities of Miranda. And there is one more character that is being discussed here, which is very important piece of information, that Prospero says that it is the providence divine, some food we had and some fresh water, that the noble man named Gonzalo, now he happens to be from Naples, right? He was somebody who was appointed as the master of this design, and it is his generosity that he did provide some garments and some stuff and necessities. And to top it all, he knew that Prospero was so much in love with his own library books, so he made sure that he would keep all those volumes of books. That was Prospero's prized kingdom. So this shows Gonzalo's loyalty, and he happens to be very different from what Antonio is. So here we end this long narration of Prospero and his past, revealing it for the first time after 12 long years, sharing this with his only daughter Miranda. We also come to know in this part of the text as to how difficult it would have been for Prospero. As a single parent, he had to play multiple roles to see to it that the upbringing of
Miranda is not suffered. He plays both the role of a mother, a teacher, a friend, a parent. And then later on, you know, look at the lines. Line 169. He rises. Now I rise. Probably both of them, the father and the daughter, were sitting down somewhere and sharing this long story. And then he stands. He stands up. This is something very significant, very meaningful. It conveys, you know, more than what it actually is. What do you mean by now I rise? It is a kind of a metaphorical rise. He rises in his fortune. Right? All this while, all these 12 years that he is, courtier in this island with no resources, this his time has come. In fact, he says here, Shakespeare makes it very pertinent here to talk about man's destiny and how it is dependent on fortune. Yeah, right? And the message is very clear, wherein he says that by accident most strange, bountiful fortune, now my dear lady hath my enemies brought to this shore. So who are these enemies? All those people who are here, the ship, right? So in fact now we get to know, it makes a kind of a complete circle, a complete sense as to why did he do this. In fact, when Prospero finds out that his enemy is very close to this island, he feels the need to do something urgently. In fact, fortune has been so favorable, and there's so much time that has passed now, and having people here right before him, he immediately needs to take the charge. And this is how we come to know as to why is he responsible for the storm, for the tempest. And at the same time, guys, there's something very important we should not miss out here, where he makes it very clear, saying that nobody has been injured. No, he cannot waste time in storytelling. And in fact, the first part of this scene 2 is informing Miranda of the past, and that is complete now. And now he is ready to move on to the second stage. So what is his plan? And as readers, we tend to be more serious as to what next. If he is somebody who is so powerful that can create storm and thunder and lightning, he can go to any extent. But he did not misuse this power. He did not hurt anybody. This is something very important to be noted. So now we move on to the next part of this story. So the first part is informing Miranda of the past, and what we see is he moves on to the next plan. So as readers, we are anxious to find out as to what next. We see the signs of readiness of Prospero to meet a very important character of our text, Ariel. And we are introduced to Ariel and Ariel's relationship with Prospero. So what we find out is, the text, the incidents that we see in first scene makes some sense having heard Prospero's story.